Franklin Joseph Frankie Lymon was an American rock and roll rhythm and blues singer and songwriter, best known as the boy-soprano lead singer of the New York City-based early rock and roll group, the Teenagers. The group was composed of 5 boys, all in their early to mid-teens. The original lineup of the Teenagers, an integrated group, included 3 African-American members, Frankie Lymon, Jimmy Merchant and Sherman Garnes, and 2 Puerto Rican members, Herman Santiago and Joe Negrini. The Teenagers' first single, 1956's "Why Do Fools Fall in Love," was also their biggest hit. After Lymon went solo in mid-1957, both his career and those of the Teenagers fell into decline. At age 25, he was found dead in his grandmother's bathroom from a heroin overdose. His life was dramatized in the 1998 film Why Do Fools Fall in Love? Early years, joining the Teenagers, Frankie Lymon was born in Harlem to a truck driver father and a mother who worked as a maid. Lymon's mother and father, Howard and Jeanette Lymon, also sang in a gospel group known as the Harlemaires. Frankie Lymon and his brothers Louis and Howie sang with the Harlem Juniors. The Lymon family struggled to make ends meet, and Lymon began working as a grocery boy at age 10. At the age of 12 in 1954, Lymon heard a local doo-wop group known as the Coupe de Villes at a school talent show. He befriended their lead singer, Herman Santiago, and he eventually became a member of the group, now calling itself both the Ermines and the Premiers. Dennis Jackson of Columbus, Georgia, was one of the main influences in Lymon's life. His personal donation of $500 helped start Lymon's career. One day in 1955, a neighbor gave the Premiers several love letters that had been written to him by his girlfriend, with the hopes that he could give the boys inspiration to write their own songs. Merchant and Santiago adapted one of the letters into a song called, "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?" The Premiers, now calling themselves the Teenagers, got their first shot at fame after impressing Richard Barrett, a singer with the Valentines. Barrett, in turn, got the group an audition with record producer George Goldner. On the day of the group's audition, Santiago, the original lead singer, was late. Lymon stepped up and told Goldner that he knew the part because he helped write the song. The disc jockeys always called them Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers. Life and career: Why Do Fools Fall in Love fame and success, Goldner signed the quintet to G Records, and Why Do Fools Fall in Love became their first single in January 1956. The single peaked at number 6 on the Billboard Pop Singles chart, and topped the Billboard R&B Singles chart for 5 weeks. 5 other R&B top 10 singles followed over the next year or so: I Want You to Be My Girl, I Promise to Remember, Who Can Explain, Out in the Cold Again, and The ABCs of Love. I'm Not a Juvenile Delinquent, and Baby Baby were also popular Teenagers releases. I Want You to Be My Girl gave the band its second pop hit, reaching number 13 on the national Billboard Hot 100 chart. Goody Goody was a number 20 pop hit, but did not appear on the R&B chart. The Teenagers placed 2 other singles in the lower half of the pop chart. With the release of I Want You to Be My Girl, the group's second single, the Teenagers became Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers. An album, The Teenagers featuring Frankie Lymon, was issued in December 1956. Going solo: in early 1957, Lymon and the Teenagers broke up while on a tour of Europe. During an engagement at the London Palladium, Goldner began pushing Lymon as a solo act, giving him solo spots in the show. Lymon began performing with backing from pre-recorded tapes. The group's last single, Goody Goody backed with Creation of Love, initially retained the Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers credit, but they were actually solo recordings. Lymon had officially departed from the group by September 1957. An in-progress studio album called Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers at the London Palladium was instead issued as a Lymon solo release. As a solo artist, Lymon was not nearly as successful as he had been with the Teenagers. Beginning with his second solo release, My Girl, Lymon had moved to Roulette Records. On a July 19, 1957, episode of Alan Freed's live ABC TV show The Big Beat, Lymon began dancing with a white teenage girl while performing. His actions caused a scandal, particularly among Southern TV station owners, and the Big Beat was subsequently cancelled. Lymon's slowly declining sales fell sharply after his voice changed and he lost his signature soprano voice. Adopting a falsetto, Lymon carried on. His highest charting solo hit was a cover of Bobby Day's Little Bitty Pretty One, which peaked at number 58 on the Hot 100 pop chart in 1960, and which had actually been recorded in 1957. Addicted to heroin since age 15, Lymon fell further into his habit, and his performing career went into decline. According to Lymon in an interview with Ebony magazine in 1967, he said that at the age of 15 he was first introduced to heroin by a woman twice his age. In 1961, Roulette, now run by Maurice Levy, ended their contract with Lymon and the singer entered a drug rehabilitation program. After losing Lymon, the teenagers went through a string of replacement singers, the first of whom was Billy Lobrano. In 1960, Howard Kenny Bobo sang lead on Tonight's the Night with the Teenagers. Later that year, Johnny Houston sang lead on 2 songs. The Teenagers, who had been moved by Maurice Levy to End Records, were released from their contract in 1961. The Teenagers briefly reunited with Lymon in 1965, without success. Later years, over the next 4 years, Lymon struggled through short-lived deals with 20th Century Fox Records and Columbia Records. Lymon began a relationship with Elizabeth Waters, who became his first wife in January 1964 and the mother of his first and only child, a baby girl named Francine who died 2 days after birth at Lenox Hill Hospital. Lymon's marriage to Waters was not legal, because she was still married to her first husband. After the marriage failed, he moved to Los Angeles in the mid-1960s, where he began a romantic relationship with Zola Taylor, a member of the Platters. Taylor claimed to have married Lymon in Mexico in 1965, although their relationship ended several months later, purportedly because of Lymon's drug habits. Lymon, however, had been known to say that their marriage was a publicity stunt and Taylor could produce no legal documentation of their marriage. In Major Robinson's gossip column of June 6, 1966, Zola said the whole thing was a joke that she went along with at the time. He appeared at the Apollo as part of a review, adding an extended tap dance number. Lymon recorded several live performances, but none rose on the charts. His final television performance was on Hollywood A Go-Go in 1965, where the then 22-year-old singer lip-synced to the recording of his 13-year-old self singing, "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?" The same year, Lymon was drafted into the United States Army, and reported to Fort Gordon, Georgia, near Augusta, Georgia, for training. While in the Augusta area, Lymon met and fell in love with Amira Eagle, a schoolteacher at Hornsby Elementary in Augusta. The two were wed in June 1967, and Lymon repeatedly went AWOL to secure gigs at small Southern clubs. Dishonorably discharged from the Army, Lymon moved into his wife's home and continued to perform sporadically. Traveling to New York in 1968, Lymon was signed by manager Sam Bray to his Big Apple label, and the singer returned to recording. Roulette Records expressed interest in releasing Lymon's records in conjunction with Big Apple and scheduled a recording session for February 28. A major promotion had been arranged with CHO Associates, owned by radio personalities Frankie Crocker, Herb Hamlet and Eddie Oa. Lymon, staying at his grandmother's house in Harlem where he had grown up, celebrated his good fortune by taking heroin. He had remained clean ever since entering the Army 3 years earlier. Death. On February 27, 1968, Lymon was found dead of a heroin overdose at age 25 in his grandmother's bathroom. Lymon, a Baptist, was buried at Catholic St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Throgs Neck section of the Bronx, New York City, New York. I'm Sorry, and Sea Breeze, the two songs Lymon had recorded for Big Apple before his death, were released later in 1968. Posthumous troubles. Lymon's troubles extended to others after his death. After R&B singer Diana Ross returned, Why Do Fools Fall in Love to the top 10 in 1981, a major controversy concerning Lymon's estate ensued. Zola Taylor, Elizabeth Waters, and Amira Eagle each approached Morris Levy, the music impresario who retained possession of Lymon's copyrights and his royalties, claiming to be Lymon's rightful widow. Lymon had neglected to divorce both Taylor and Waters. The complex issue resulted in lawsuits and counter-lawsuits, and in 1986, the first of several court cases concerning the ownership of Lymon's estate began. Trying to determine who was indeed the lawful Mrs. Frankie Lymon was complicated by more issues. Waters was already married when she married Lymon. She had separated from her first husband, but their divorce was finalized in 1965, after she had married Lymon. Taylor claimed to have married Lymon in Mexico in 1965, but could produce no acceptable evidence of their union. Lymon's marriage to Eagle, on the other hand, was properly documented as having taken place at the Beulah Grove Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia, in 1967. However, the singer was still apparently twice married and never divorced when he married Eagle. The first decision was made in Waters' favor. Eagle appealed, and in 1989, the Appellate Division of the New York State Supreme Court reversed the original decision and awarded Lymon's estate to Eagle. However, the details of the case brought about another issue, whether Morris Levy was deserving of the songwriting co-credit on Why Do Fools Fall in Love. Although early single releases of Why Do Fools Fall in Love credit Frankie Lymon, Herman Santiago, and Jimmy Merchant as co-writers, later releases and cover versions were attributed to Lymon and George Goldner. When Goldner sold his music companies to Morris Levy in 1959, Levy's name began appearing as co-writer of Why Do Fools Fall in Love in place of Goldner's. Lymon was never paid his songwriting royalties during his lifetime. One result of Amira Eagle's legal victory was that Lymon's estate would finally begin receiving monetary compensation from his hit song's success. In 1987, Herman Santiago and Jimmy Merchant, both then poor, sued Morris Levy for their songwriting credits. In December 1992, the United States federal courts ruled that Santiago and Merchant were co-authors of Why Do Fools Fall in Love. However, in 1996 the ruling was reversed by the Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit on the basis of the statute of limitations. Copyright cases must be brought before a court within 3 years of the alleged civil violation, and Merchant and Santiago's lawsuit was not filed until 30 years later. Authorship of Why Do Fools Fall in Love currently remains in the names of Frankie Lymon and Morris Levy. Legacy. Although their period of success was brief, Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers' string of hits were highly influential on the rock and R&B performers who followed them. Lymon's high-voiced sound is said to be a direct predecessor of the girl group sound, and the list of performers who name him as an influence include Michael Jackson, Ronnie Spector, Diana Ross, The Chantels, The Temptations, Smokey Robinson, Len Barry, and the Beach Boys, among others. The performers most inspired by and derivative of Lymon and the Teenagers' style are the Jackson 5 and their lead singer and future superstar Michael Jackson. Motown founder Berry Gordy based much of the Jackson 5 sound on Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers' recordings, and the Teenagers are believed to be the original model for many of the other Motown groups he cultivated. Lymon's music and story were reintroduced to modern audiences with Why Do Fools Fall in Love, a 1998 biographical film directed by Gregory Nava, also the director of the Selena biopic. Why Do Fools Fall in Love tells a comedic, fictionalized version of Lymon's story from the points of view of his 3 wives as they battle in court for the rights to his estate. The film stars Lawrence Tate as Frankie Lymon, Halle Berry as Zola Taylor, Vivica A. Fox as Elizabeth Waters, and Lela Rocken as Elmira Eagle. Why Do Fools Fall in Love was not a commercial success and met with mixed reviews. The film grossed a total of $12,461,773 during its original theatrical run. In 1973, Lymon became known to a slightly younger generation than before with the release of American Graffiti, which included Why Do Fools Fall in Love on its soundtrack. The song Harlem Roulette by the Mountain Goats off their 2012 album Transcendental Youth contains reference to Frankie Lymon and has been stated by frontman John Darnielle to be about the last night of Lymon's life. Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993, and into the Vocal Group Hall of Fame in 2000. Discography, Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers Discography, Singles, G Releases, 1956-01. G1002, Why Do Fools Fall in Love / Please Be Mine 1, 1956-04, G1012, I Want You to Be My Girl / I'm Not a Know-It-All 2, 1956-07, G1018, I Promise to Remember / Who Can Explain, 1956-10, G1022, The ABCs of Love / Share, 1957-02, G1026, I'm Not a Juvenile Delinquent / Baby, Baby, 1957-04, G1032, Teenage Love / Paper Castles, 1957-05, G1035, Love is a Clown / Am I Fooling Myself Again, 1957-06, G1036, Out in the Cold Again / Miracle in the Rain 5, 1957-07, G1039, Goody Goody / Creation of Love 3, 1957-12, G1046, Everything to Me / Flip Flop 4, Notes, 1 released as by the Teenagers, R Squared early copies released as by the Teenagers featuring Frankie Lymon. Billing on later pressings changed to Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers, R Cubed. Both sides of this release are actually Frankie Lymon solo recordings. 4 billed as the Teenagers, 5 released as by the Teenagers featuring Frankie Lymon, album, 1956, G701, The Teenagers featuring Frankie Lymon, compilations, 1986, Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers, for collectors only, Frankie Lymon solo discography, singles, Roulette releases, 1957, Roulette 4026, My Girl / So Goes My Love, 1957, Roulette 4035, Little Girl / It's Christmas Once Again, 1958, Roulette 4044, Thumb Thumb / Footsteps, 1958, Roulette 4068, Portable on My Shoulder / Mama Don't Allow It a Euro 4/58, 1958, Roulette 4093, Only Way to Love / Melinda, 1959, Roulette 4128, Up Jump to Rabbit / No Matter What You've Done, 1969, Roulette 21095 /1-20-12 Forever, G Release, 1959, G1052, Goody Good Girl / I'm Not Too Young to Dream, Roulette Releases, 1960, Roulette 4257, Little Bitty Pretty One / Creation of Love, 1960, Roulette 4283, Buzz 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 / Waitin' in School, 1961, Roulette 4310, Jailhouse Rock / Silhouettes, 1961, Roulette 4348, Change Partners / So Young, 1961, Roulette 4391, Young / I Put the Bomb, later releases, 1964, To Each His Own / Teacher, Teacher, 1964, Somewhere / Sweet and Lovely, 1969, I'm Sorry / Sea Breeze, albums, 1956, Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers, 1981 reissue Roulette Y2-116 G701, 1957, Frankie Lymon at the London Palladium, 1958, Rock and Roll with Frankie Lymon, 1994, complete recordings, references. Further reading, Doo-Wop, Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers. The Entertainers We Love. Grossman, Wendy. Widow of Singer Claims Film Phony. Augusta Chronicle. External links. Marv Goldberg's biography of Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers, Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers at HistoryRifeRock.com, Tom Simon's article on the Teenagers, Frankie Lymon at the Internet Movie Database, Frankie Lymon at Find a Grave.